Hey guys, this is Markart. I just want to talk about this script that I posted up on the RE forums. This is the Mrl Editor, which I made for Resident Evil 6, of course on the PC. The MRL file is basically a separate material file. What I mean is you have your models, and the materials are separate from the models. So uh, for Resident Evil 6, we have a file called MOD, which is straight up geometry and basically the model. So we have models there, and then the materials are separate from that for some reason. So if you're familiar with Wavefront Object, it's a common PC format to store 3D models, and they work in a two-file kind of system. You have OBJ for the object or the mesh, and then you have MTL for the material. And without the MTL, you can't have a material. So same situation applies to Resident Evil 6. We have the model appearing as the MOD file and the material library appearing as the MRL file. Okay, so when I came into the kind of scene of getting into hacking and modding Resident Evil 6, there was a need to understand the MRL file. They were getting into swapping model pieces and stuff like that, and they had discrepancies. Materials were appearing checkered or invisible or black, and they were having material issues in general. So I looked at the structure of the MRL, and in truth, there's a large part of the MRL that I do not understand structure-wise. But the structures that I do understand, I took them apart, picked them apart, and I put that on the forum. And people were kind of confused. They didn't really understand the purpose of a structure, which is no good, because further on beyond that, they started poking at the MRL file, and they started building opinions and I guess an idea of how it worked. And the problem was they didn't know how to describe themselves. I basically got a lot of, oh look, I found this magical byte in the file, and I changed the byte, and this happened. Yeah, I'm so happy. And then they would try it again on a different file, or somebody else would try to repeat their experiment. And they're like, I can't do it, man. I don't know what you're talking about. So, of course, what they're doing is basically, if I bring up a hex editor here, we have a file which potentially has over 100,000 bytes in it, right? Now, for someone to come along and say, hey Mario, I found this byte, which is BD, and I changed it to maybe 22 or something like that. Now, I can have maybe like hundreds of instances of the value B2 or something like that. So, to locate or retrace what that person did is nearly impossible without them understanding structure. If they can't understand structure, then they can't describe themselves. So this was a kind of a pain in the butt. I had no idea how to dissect the MRL, and I was kind of hoping the community could do it for me. And I was aware that people were not too good using a hex editor, and people were not too aware of structure. So I saw a need to make this thing you see in front of you. This is the MRL editor. It basically replaces the hex editor, just giving you the meaty parts, the most important parts of the MRL file that you can freely edit, and you can observe the changes in game. And this will give us an idea of what these bytes do and what they mean, and how we can manipulate them, and how we can use them to our advantage. Okay, so I did that. I slapped up this thing here. This thing will allow you to edit the material file, the MRL file. Now, people use this and they're like, okay, Mario, I loaded up my MRL file. I changed something and my game crashed. Your program doesn't work. Now, that's not the point. This thing is not to cause your materials to reappear. It's not made to fix your materials. This is basically what it is. It's an editor. It allows you to view and edit what's happening in the MRL. Now, if you by chance change something in the MRL which caused the game to crash, then, well, that's a different issue. That's something that we have to discover, is how the MRL works internally and stuff like that, so that we can understand what's causing these things to crash and to avoid that, right? So, well, now with all that baseline information kind of setting the path and paving the path, I'm going to show you how to use this editor so that you can maybe potentially discover the MRL for yourself. So I believe that this is pretty simple. You just hit Open MRL, and then you can just select an MRL. Okay, this is loading up a lot of information. Maybe a little bit overwhelming, but what we basically have here are two separate pieces of information. The first set of information is the texture paths. Okay, so we have a texture library. So these are various textures for diffuse and specular and stuff like that. And they're in an ordered sequence, and they make up this list here. Okay, now say for example you want to insert a new texture. Okay, you just have to double left click on anything, and it'll insert. Sorry, if you double click, it'll insert an empty space. Okay, now say you want to type something in there, you just have to select the space, and you can type in something new, and it'll replace it. Okay, same thing with a line that's already existing, you can add on to it, and so it's self-explanatory. This thing will allow you to edit what's in your texture library. Okay, now there's no actual textures in here. These are just the paths that go to the textures that you have or need to load up. Okay, now say for example I want to delete what I added. I can just select that space and hit delete or del. Okay, and this gives us some management over the texture library. Okay, the course is get. This will allow you to just find a file and open it, and it'll insert onto the bottom that full file path. Right, and yeah, so that's just for if you want to add stuff. Save as will allow you to save a new MRL. Okay, if you just want to save directly over your original one, you're going to click this checkbox and then hit save as. Now you won't get prompted, it'll just save. Okay, so that may be a little bit dangerous if you want to preserve a copy, but this will come in handy if you want to check a lot of stuff out. You just check that box, change something, save, test it, change something, save. So it's there for speed purposes. Otherwise, it's left off. All right, so that's the first half. The second half has to do with the materials themselves. So what we basically have is textures and materials. And if you're not unfamiliar with materials, what materials will do is they'll grab a bunch of textures and manipulate them together to form an effect. And the materials do that by using a shader, which the shader will give specific instructions on how to manipulate that and apply that shading effect to the actual model. So we have the material which directs the shader and it combines the textures. It's basically linking stuff together. It's defining how to shade your object. That's what it's doing. So if you look at, for example, the slate editor in 3ds Max, okay, we can create a material like, for example, here, and then we can keep adding stuff to different slots like diffuse, specularity, and stuff like that. But we can take it a step further. We can start adding more onto that, and we can start creating a chain of, I guess these are called modifiers, material modifiers, which will eventually result in a final outcome for your material. So it's not uncommon to see this type of complexity with your material. So this data is not understood. However, it's not unexpected. I believe what this is right here is these are the separate materials. Okay, so material 1 to 10. So if we select a material, we have all these subsections, and I believe what these subsections could possibly be are what we see kind of in the slate editor, where we can plug in different slots and give them different modifiers or properties or effects. Okay, now you can see that these are all fixed length. So I'm just guessing that if one of these is requesting a value, a color value, a power value, that it's appending it to this stuff called float data. So in the material file, after all these things that I call calls, okay, we have 33 of them. After these 33 calls, we have a long list of float data. The float data is just random values, not random values, but rather just values. Okay. Now, if I select a different material here, you'll notice that these float values represented in pages will change. So each material has a different amount of float data. So again, this is dependent on the calls here. For example, this one has 40 calls. This one maybe have less or so forth. So I'm guessing that one of these calls is defining how much this data is present, or at which position of, I guess, this array will the data be stored. Okay. So the problem is I don't understand how this information links together. So as soon as you change something here, by the way, if you want to edit something, you just select a line and type in a number or something like that, and it'll change the line. Okay. So anyway, if you change the line, what it'll potentially do is it'll unsync this calling information to the float data. Say for example, this float line was saying, okay, store 5 lines of information. Now if I change this in any way or delete it, that 5 pieces of information may turn into 60 pieces of information, which I don't have. Okay. So if you do make a change here, it runs the potential risk of causing the game to lock up or freeze. So that's the problem there. So this is unsafe, okay? But it is there because it's important that we understand it, and it's important that we try to mess with it so that we can understand it. But I did want to have this editor be at a point where it could have a practical function. So right now, the texture library has a practical function. We can rename a texture for whatever that's worth, and we can go from there. Like, say, for example, I have a texture called face, but I want to rename it. That's not a big thing, but it allows for a somewhat practical function. Now, for the materials, we do have a somewhat practical function. What we can do is, if these are really the materials, we can export them. Okay. Now, this will export both the calling data and the float data together. So, without them being desynced, they're going to be synced with the material, and you can interchange them. Okay. But there's a tricky part. What I didn't understand was these hash codes here, they're actually identifiers. So if you change one of these identifiers, the model file won't be able to find that material. It'll crash, and it may cause a hang. So what you have to do is, I was doing an example here. Let's export the first material. Okay, I'm going to call this original. Yep. And I'm going to export the final material, which is number 10, and I'm going to call that one new for whatever reason. Okay, so I'm going to go back to number 1, and I'm going to import, or replace actually, I'm going to replace over top number 1 with the profile exported of number 10. So I'm going to go ahead and replace, hit new. So you're going to notice that the material name is now changed, and it's actually copied the material name of number 10. Okay, so now this is a problem. If the game tried to look for the material name that was at number 1 originally, it's not going to find it, and it could run the potential risk of causing a hang or crash. So now, to get this to work, all you have to do is, let's just replace it back with the original here. We want to maintain this code. So if I go over here, I can open up the original, and I can copy the material identifier, which is at unknown 2. So you can just copy that whole line, I guess. And you can close this. And then in your new material that you want to replace it with, you're going to have to paste over with that material identifier. Okay, so we'll just save that. Okay, so notice here now, if we import or replace over the top of that, it's going to remain the same. So using new again, and now we've replaced the material with all new information, all new calling data, all new float data, but we've retained the identifier. So in theory, the game should be able to now identify the material that you have there. And because we haven't desynced any of the information, this should be valid, and it should work. Okay. So anyway, so that's the Mrl Editor. I'm hoping some people can take use of it. These buttons here, they allow micromanagement of the calling data. I can reorder up and down. I can delete them. But like I said, that's just going to cause a unneeded desyncing of the float data, which will probably result in a crash. So it's there in case you want to experiment, but just be aware that anytime you're dealing with data below this area, you are potentially causing a risk for game crashing.